Okay, so you're thinking about adding Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard to your TBR pile, but you're busy, right? We all are. You don't want to waste time on a book that's just, You want to know, is it really worth it?
And that's what we're here to figure out.
Exactly. In this deep dive, we're going deep on Red Queen. We've got a detailed book review to work with, some notes for a potential video review, and even some pretty passionate opinions from Goodreads.
Lots to unpack.
Definitely. But before we get lost in the details, let's start with the big picture. Is Red Queen worth your precious reading time?
So, based on everything we've looked at, here's the verdict. Red Queen is a good read. It's solid, but don't expect it to reinvent the wheel. It's fun, it's fast-paced, but it definitely draws on a lot of familiar elements.
Familiar elements meaning?
Think popular YA dystopian and fantasy novels, things you've probably seen before. Ah, okay. So, not exactly groundbreaking. I can see why some people might be hesitant, especially if they've already read books like Hunger Games and Shadow and Bone, which seem to have some overlap with Red Queen based on what I'm seeing here.
Right. The reviewer actually compared Mare Barrow, the main character in Red Queen, to Alina from Shadow and Bone.
Interesting. In what way?
They both discover they have special powers, then they're thrown into these intense situations and worlds they never expected. And of course, there's the love triangle.
Oh no, not another love triangle.
Hmm.
Are we talking the same old torn between two guys trope? Come on, tell me there's something new here.
Well, it is a big part of the story, and Mare is drawn to two very different guys. Cal, who's a prince, and Maven, his brother. The reviewer actually compared Maven to the Darkling from Shadow and Bone.
Hold on. A prince and a brooding bad boy. Doesn't get more classic YA than that. So is Cal at least a little bit original?
You know, the reviewer did mention that Cal doesn't really have a direct equivalent in other popular YA books, which makes him stand out a bit. Okay, that's something. But what about the love triangle itself? Does it work?
Well, the reviewers seem to have some mixed feelings about it. They thought it was interesting that Cal is actually a pretty decent guy. He's honorable. He even risks his life for Mare, which is not always the case with YA love interests.
Right. Usually it's all about the bad boy.
Exactly. But the reviewer also pointed out that Mare is really quick to dismiss Cal, even when he's being totally selfless. They didn't really get that.
So maybe Mare isn't making the best choices.
Hmm.
I mean, that's realistic, I guess.
Yeah.
But does that mean she's a poorly written character? Because I need a protagonist I can root for, even if they mess up sometimes.
I get it. And that's actually one of the things Red Queen does well. The characters, especially Mare, are well developed. She's not perfect. She makes mistakes. She's impulsive. And she doubts herself, which makes her a lot more relatable than your typical chosen one YA heroine.
Okay, I like that. Give me an example of Mare's flaws, though, because I want to get a sense of how realistic she is.
So, there's this scene where Mare gets furious with Cal for something that's completely out of his control. It makes no sense, really. But it shows how inexperienced Mare is. She's this red girl thrown into this world of silver privilege and court intrigue. She's in over her head, and it shows.
So her flaws make sense in the context of the story. I can see that. But what about the writing itself? Is Aveyard's style going to pull me in, or is it just basic?
Well, the reviewer described it as being very readable.
Readable. That doesn't sound too exciting.
True, but for this type of book, I don't think that's a bad thing. It's not trying to be literary fiction, right? It's focused on the plot, the twists, and the action, which seems to be exactly what the target audience wants.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But does it deliver on those twists and turns? Because predictable plots can be a deal breaker.
Well, I did see one Goodreads comment that compared Red Queen to a Walmart version of the Hunger Games.
Ouch. But are they really that similar?
There are definitely some parallels. The dystopian setting, the class segregation, and the brutal tournaments. But Red Queen also brings its own things to the table.
Like what?
Well, the magic system, for one. That's something Hunger Games doesn't have. And the way that magic is woven into the society, how it's used for control and oppression, is pretty unique. Plus, there are the character dynamics, especially within the love triangle, which, love it or hate it, keeps things interesting.
Okay, so it's not just a Hunger Games ripoff, which is good to know. But what about the ending? Does it leave you wanting more, or is it a super tidy conclusion? Because I'm all about those cliffhangers.
Well, let's just say the reviewer was initially pretty lukewarm on the book as a whole, but the ending completely changed their mind. They were actually excited to read the next book, Glass Sword, which, based on some of the Goodreads comments, is high praise.
Whoa, a game-changer ending. Okay, I'm intrigued. But before we jump ahead to the sequel, Let's get into some of the specifics of Red Queen, because I think we have a lot more to uncover.
Yeah.
All right, so we talked about the love triangle, a maybe predictable plot, and a world that might be borrowing a bit too much from other books. But you said the characters are well developed and the ending is really something. I'm curious, what did the reviewers say about the love triangle specifically? Because even the Goodreads comments are super divided on that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's definitely one of those love it or hate it things. Some people are all about it, and others find it frustrating and predictable. Like, they saw it coming a mile away. The reviewers seem to be somewhere in the middle. They liked that Cal is kind of a different type of love interest for YA. He's not the usual brooding bad boy. But they were really confused by how quickly Mare pushes him away, especially because he's constantly putting himself out there for her.
Right, like he seems like a genuinely good guy.
Hmm.
So why is Mare so drawn to Maven, the one being compared to the Darkling? That's setting off some alarm bells for me.
Yeah, I get it. The Darkling comparisons are not a great sign, usually. The reviewer called him a sympathetic antagonist.
Sympathetic antagonist, meaning...
He's got a backstory. Like,
Ah.
there are reasons for why he does the things he does. It might make you understand him a little better, or even feel a little bad for him. But that doesn't mean he's not capable of some pretty messed up stuff. And the reviewer pointed out that Mare seems totally blinded to some pretty obvious red flags when it comes to Maven.
Oh, no! That's frustrating. Like, come on, Mare. But I guess that's realistic in a way. People get blinded by charm all the time. But does this love triangle take over the whole book? Is there anything else going on? Because I need more than just romance to keep me interested.
Don't worry, there's definitely more. Remember how the reviewer called Mare a terrible freedom fighter? That wasn't just about the love triangle.
Okay, what makes her so terrible? I need some specifics here. Am I going to end up hating her?
Well, there was this one example the reviewer kept bringing up. Mare refuses to learn the names of any Silvers that get killed in the rebel attacks. She basically says it's too much to carry. The reviewer found that really cold, dehumanizing.
Yeah, that's pretty harsh. But is that because she's ruthless? Or is it more of a coping mechanism? I mean, she's leading this rebellion, making decisions that get people killed. That has to mess with you. Maybe she's shutting down emotionally to deal with it.
That's a good point. And it does raise some interesting questions about what it takes to lead, what war does to a person, even when it's for a good cause. But what the reviewer is saying is that if you're going to make the decision to kill, even if it's for the greater good, you have to own that. You can't just pretend it doesn't affect you.
I see what you mean. It's about taking responsibility for your actions, even the really tough ones. And that definitely adds a new dimension to Mare's character. She's not just fighting for freedom, she's also figuring out her own morality.
Exactly. And that's kind of what makes Red Queen more interesting than you might think at first. It might have those familiar elements, but it's also asking some deeper questions.
So it's not just a mindless YA adventure.
Not really. It delves into some pretty big themes. Power, good versus evil, what people sacrifice in the name of justice. It asks whether revolution is actually worth it if it means becoming the thing you are fighting against.
Ooh, okay, I like that. But before we go full philosophy professor here, let's get back to the characters, specifically the love interests. Does Cal, the honorable prince, actually live up to that title?
Well, the reviewer was a little annoyed at how quickly Mare writes Cal off, even when he's always putting himself on the line for her. They did say that Cal actually kind of breaks the mold when it comes to YA love interests. He's not trying to manipulate her. He's not a jerk. He seems like he's genuinely trying to do the right thing, even if it means going against his own family.
So he's a good guy, maybe even a little too good. Is that why she's more interested in Maven, the maybe evil brother? Because bad boys are always more exciting, right?
It's a classic dilemma. The reviewer did say that Maven is written as a sympathetic antagonist. There's a reason for the things he does, a background that might make you feel for him.
Okay, so he's not just a flat villain character. There's some depth there. But is the love triangle actually well written? Because I've read so many books where it just feels forced, like it's only there because it's expected.
It seems like it's a big part of the story, and opinions are all over the place. Some people are totally hooked on the romance, and others think it's predictable and kind of takes away from the rest of the plot. The reviewers seemed a little torn, like they liked how complicated the characters are, but were frustrated with some of the choices Mare makes.
So it's a gamble. You might love it, you might hate it. But it sounds like there's enough going on besides the romance to keep it interesting. What about the world building? You mentioned it had some familiar stuff, but also some unique aspects.
Oh, right. Remember that Goodreads comment comparing Red Queen to, like, a cheap knockoff of the Hunger Games?
Yeah, that one was brutal. But are they really that similar?
I mean, there are definitely some things that are alike. The whole dystopian setting, the class separation between the silvers and the reds, those brutal tournaments they hold. If you're into dystopian fiction, you've probably seen these elements before.
But you said Red Queen also does its own thing. How so?
It's all in the details. It
Yeah.
takes those familiar elements and combines them with Aveyard's own world building. The magic system, for instance, is way more complex than what you see in Hunger Games. The different powers, how they're connected to family lines, and how they're used to control people. That's where Red Queen really starts to stand out.
And what about the writing style? Is it good?
The reviewer just said it was readable.
Readable. Okay, that's not super promising.
True, but for this genre, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. The writing isn't trying to win any literary awards, it's straightforward. The pacing is quick, it's all about the plot and the action, which is probably what most people reading this kind of book are looking for.
Yeah, fair enough. Not everything has to be super highbrow. But you mentioned that the ending was a game changer. Can you tell us more about that without spoiling anything?
Well, the reviewer was pretty vague about the details, but they did say that the epilogue totally shifted their whole perspective on the book. They went from being kind of meh about it to being super excited to read the sequel. So clearly something big happens.
Oh, I love a good cliffhanger ending.
Mhm.
But before we move on to the sequel, let's talk about one last thing. Those moral dilemmas you mentioned. Mare makes some iffy choices. It sounds like she might even become part of the problem she's fighting against. Does she ever redeem herself? Does the book offer any hope for a better future?
That's a really great question, and honestly, it's something you'll have to figure out for yourself as you read the book. The reviewer didn't give any easy answers, but they did make it clear that the book tackles those tough issues head on. It forces you to think about power, morality, and what we're willing to sacrifice for justice.
So it's not a light and happy read.
Not exactly. It's definitely thought-provoking. It's a story that stays with you.
Okay, I'm sold. Red Queen sounds like a wild ride. I'm ready to dive in. But before we go, any last words for anyone out there who's still not sure about this book?
Just this. If you're looking for something totally original, maybe this isn't the book for you. It definitely uses some familiar tropes, but it uses those tropes to explore some really interesting themes about power, morality, and what happens during a revolution. The characters are really well developed too. Even the ones who make bad decisions, they feel like real people. If you're looking for a book that will make you think and maybe even question your own beliefs, Red Queen is worth a read.
I think that's a great note to end on. So to our listeners, we'll leave you with this question. Is Mare Barrow a hero? Or is she becoming the very thing she's fighting? Check out Red Queen and decide for yourself.
Yeah, it really makes you think about the whole idea of a hero. Like, what does that even mean when the lines are so blurred? Right. And it sounds like the ending of Red Queen really digs into that. It's not just about wrapping up the plot. It's about setting up those bigger questions, the moral dilemmas that'll keep you thinking even after you finish the book.
So no spoilers, but we're getting a sense that this ending is kind of a game changer for the whole story.
Yeah.
And for the reader's experience, it sounds like.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The reviewer even said, like, it completely shifted how they felt about the entire book. They were enjoying it, but not, like, blown away. But the ending
Yeah.
made them actually excited to pick up the next one. Glass Sword.
Interesting. Okay, so we've got this mix of familiar elements and then these deeper themes.
Yeah.
But for someone who's listening, thinking about picking this book up,
Mm-hmm.
like who is this really for? If someone wants a light, fun read, should they go for Red Queen?
Probably not the best choice for, like, a relaxing beach read. Red Queen gets pretty dark. You've got violence, oppression, characters struggling with some really heavy stuff. It's entertaining, but it's not exactly a lighthearted escape.
Okay, so maybe not a good pick for pure escapism. But if someone wants a book that will stick with them, make them think, maybe even spark some interesting conversations.
Then Red Queen is worth checking out, yeah. Especially if they love dystopian stories, those detailed magic systems, and characters who aren't afraid to get a little messy, even if it means they end up blurring the lines between good and bad.
And that's what makes it so interesting, right? These characters, even when they mess up, they feel real, they're flawed, they make mistakes, just like people do in real life.
Totally. It makes their stories so much more compelling to follow. Like, will they rise above the messed up system, or will they just become another part of the problem? Red Queen doesn't give you the easy answers, and I think that's what makes it such a good read.
Okay, I'm convinced. If you're ready to explore a world full of moral gray areas, characters you can relate to, and a story that'll make you question everything, Red Queen is waiting for you.
Happy reading!